It's a big world out there. Welcome to Bigfoot's Wilderness Podcast.
Welcome back to Bigfoot's Wilderness. Tonight, I've got a few encounter stories for you, and then an interview with Dr. Ernest Solar. So let's begin. At the time, I was recently retired. This was back in 2005. I had taken up jogging and was trying to get a few miles a day in. Sometimes I jog over at Goose Creek State Park as I live in eastern North Carolina. The day that I'll never forget, I got a late start. But not 500 feet into the park, I came upon an older fella, well, older than me, sitting on the ground and panting. I thought he was in distress, and since we have some venomous snakes around here, I thought for sure he'd been bitten. I knelt down and pulled out my first aid kit and offered to help. "I'll call 911, I said, as I pulled out my phone. He looked up at me and said, "Hell no, I'm not ill," and simply asked me to help him to his feet, but to get him the hell out of there. Okay, what's this all about?" His car wasn't too far away, and as he sat down behind the wheel, he thanked me. The next words out of his mouth were, "I'm not crazy, but I heard something screaming, and at first I thought maybe a woman was in distress, so I followed where I thought the yell came from down the path. And then I came to see a very tall, almost black, hairy-looking thing standing just off the path, partially blocked by some trees, and clearly hiding from me. I could see most of its head, some of a wide shoulder, and on down to its body, and it was looking me over too. Son, it was like staring the devil down. I got so scared, I started running, and then I remembered I have severe arthritis in my hips and legs and can't run. He pointed, "Just past the entrance, and then down another good distance down there." He looked pale, and I was attempting to stall him from driving. Okay, I said. "Well, I'm staying here with you, but I don't think it's coming here." I carry a .45, especially when I'm out running, and thankfully haven't had to use it yet. But today just might be that day. A few minutes more, and the old gentleman was driving away. Now, I had a decision to make. Go down that path with gun drawn, or maybe I should just find somewhere else to run today. He never said Bigfoot, and even when it came to mind, I thought, it does still seem kind of odd. I'm kind of a forward thinker, and I could just see me with gun drawn walking down a path looking for a creature, and I stumble upon a family on a picnic. I took the man at his word, but decided not to go exploring that day. I did, however, report it to the local authorities that there had been a bear, and it had been seen and it chased an older man who I'd offered some assistance. Not sure if they ever came out, but I wasn't comfortable telling them it was a Bigfoot. A few days later, I found myself back at the park. I had my gun, and it was securely holstered on my lower back. I never saw or heard a creature, but as I exited the beach area, I came across some footprints. They were slightly bigger than my size 12 running shoes. But the one thing that stuck out to me was how the impressions were much deeper in the sand than mine. It made me think that whoever made them must have been a big guy, or just maybe they belonged to a Bigfoot. So the interview with Dr. Ernest Solar, who is a professor at a college, has written some books. It happens to be a fictional book, but a great story, and it's called The Spirit of Sasquatch. Let me give you a little background on it. The character, Trevor Blackwood, has lost his wife to the mythical creature known as Bigfoot, and never came to terms with her disappearance. It's been over a decade since she vanished, but time hasn't stopped Trevor and his sons, Darren and Brock, from searching for her and the creatures responsible for her disappearance. In fact, their adamant hunting has given the Blackwood trio a reputation, one that's caught the attention of government forces with ulterior motives. After the youngest Blackwood goes missing, like his mother, the line between myth and reality is quickly blurred. Brock soon discovers the secrets that shroud the feared beast. Hunted by the government and sought by his father, the young boy discovers the truth behind his mother's disappearance at the hands of a menacing Sasquatch. The true nature of the Blackwood family legacy is revealed when the threads of Brock's life crashes together in a devastating confrontation with the government and the legendary creature known as Bigfoot. So that's my little plug for the book. I really enjoyed it, and I encourage you guys to take a look for it on Amazon. So let's go ahead and get into the interview with Ernest Solar. So I've got 11 questions, and we've got at least 45 minutes to an hour to answer them. So I'll give you one at a time. And first, I guess I just want to say I met you a couple of years ago at a Bigfoot conference in Waynesboro, Virginia, and you were doing a presentation. And I thought it was great. And I thought it was very thought provoking. I'm not sure if everyone in the crowd, everybody wants to see pictures and evidence all the time, but no one wants to ask the questions, right?
Sure, right. Thank you for your compliment. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really good. So let me ask you the first question, which is to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in Bigfoot.
That's a good question.
The first part or the second part?
I'll take all of it. So a little bit about myself. So my day job, I am an assistant professor of special education at a university in Maryland. So I prepare students for the classroom to become teachers in the classroom. We have a teacher prep program. So that's my day job. And then on the side, I like to write. And how I got into Bigfoot, I would probably have to blame my dad for that one. He was always very curious about the unknown, and he's a native of West Virginia. So we used to spend a lot of time driving down to Logan County, West Virginia, where he was from. And, back then there wasn't a lot of major highways in West Virginia. And so we took a lot of side roads, and we always traveled at night. And my dad, would always kind of tease me and say, hey, look out the window and see if you can see Bigfoot out there. And being like a 10-year-old, I'm thinking like, what the heck's Bigfoot? And so I did. And when we got to West Virginia, he would let me run around the mountains, and kind of had free will to run through the forest and the mountains, and just kind of explore. And I just think my father's curiosity always kind of piqued that, what is Bigfoot? And then as I got older, I started to find books and read books about it and ask questions, and it just kind of grew from there, really.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, just people my age. I'm 53, and in my age group and older, seems like a lot of people saw something on TV, or maybe some were piqued by their curiosity from what their parents would say, but a lot saw it from In Search Of or some sort of a type channel like that.
Sure. I'll be 47 this year, so we're in the same age group. I don't really remember seeing the Patterson film at an early age. I don't think I really saw that until I was probably in college. It was just more from like books and of that nature that I kind of developed this love for it. With my father, it was Bigfoot, it was UFOs, it was pyramids, it was lost treasures. And so, there was always just this, he was always kind of searching for something, looking for something, curious about something. And so I just think it kind of sparked that curiosity of the unknown inside of me, and just kind of went from there.
Well, I guess the best question to follow up to that is because you are also a researcher. I understand you've participated in some BFRO expeditions, but were they local, or which states have you investigated? And this is a multifaceted question, did you experience any activity?
Great question. I would. So when I was finishing up my PhD, working on a PhD dissertation is a lot of work, and I needed something to like focus on. I needed like a prize at the end, right? Just getting a degree wasn't good enough for me. I needed like some type of prize to kind of shoot for. So my wife, who was my fiance at the time, she's from Northwest Pennsylvania, and I asked her, I was like, do you believe in Bigfoot? And she's like, oh, of course I do. It's this, it's local life up there in the Northwest Pennsylvania. We all believe in it. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. So then, so, so then I said, well, hey, I said, what if we went on a BFRO expedition out to New Mexico when my dissertation's done and over with? And she agreed. So just, for the fun of it, we signed up for it, went out to New Mexico. That was in 2013. And we had an expedition out there. And then in 2016, I was asked to join the Colorado expedition of the BFRO. And I went out there in 2016. And then I've done some like local stuff on my own or with researchers that I've become friends with, in like Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, West Virginia. But like the two BFRO ones were in New Mexico and Colorado. To answer the second part of your question of, did we experience anything on those two BFRO expeditions? We did. We definitely did. In New Mexico, we found some interesting tree structures in one valley. Many of the participants heard noises. My wife and I and a friend of ours from Colorado, the last night of the expedition, we had some activity in a field across from us. I thought I saw something peeking out from behind a tree, and my wife saw something stand up in the field. So was it definite? Did we take a picture of it? It was, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. But we're pretty confident on what we saw and what we experienced. And then in Colorado, heard some noises, some howls. I know on that expedition, I do know that one person said his foot got touched through his tent, but he was like off from the rest of the main camp. But that expedition was pretty quiet, to say the least part.
So how does that work with the BFRO expeditions? Do you have like a point person that like kind of takes you out or familiarizes you with the area and then kind of gives you a map and says, you search this area, you search that area?
So they typically have 3 to 5 BFRO researchers that go on one of those expeditions, and there usually is a point person, and the point person usually scopes out a hot spot activity months in advance, so that he knows or she knows a good spot to go where there might be activity. The one in New Mexico, I don't know if you remember the Finding Bigfoot season. I think it was season 1. There was a gentleman who was in the back of his truck, and a Bigfoot walked past his truck in the middle of the night. That's where the New Mexico expedition took place. And then the Colorado one is a place where they've had lots of lots of activity with this particular group. So it's usually areas that they're pretty familiar with. They do have 3 or 4 other researchers that are with them. And for those that have never been before, it's definitely a learning opportunity because they have classes during the day. Maybe classes is the wrong word, but they have like workshops during the day of what a footprint looks like, or what a tree break looks like, or what a wood knock sounds like, to kind of give the novice researcher an idea of kind of what they're looking for. And they do structure hikes, walks out into the woods at different times during the day, different times at night. And then you can also go off on your own. You just need to, kind of let them know so they have an idea where you're at. So if someone comes back and says, "Hey, I experienced this," they can be like, "Well, was that Ernest, or was that really, you know, something that you really experienced, right?" And so it kind of works in that way. To give you an example of how they kind of break things up, on the Colorado trip, I took 2 people up to about like the 10,000 foot mark where we were at, and then another group went to the 8,000 foot mark, and then we had heat therms, and we had walkie-talkies, and we would report to the other group saying, "Hey, I'm going to do a howl, or I'm going to do a wood knock," to the group below us. And then we would, do the howl, do the wood knock, or whistle or whatever, and then see if there's a response. And then the 8,000 foot group would say, "Hey, we're going to do this," and then, we'd kind of go back and forth to see if we could get any activity. Um, and then, they do like night hikes in different areas, and sometimes they just sit around the fire and make a lot of noise, and hopefully one comes up to the fire or comes up to the perimeter. So it just really kind of depends on the group that you're with.
So it really is a little bit like the TV show. I mean, that's a lot of what they did.
Yeah, it definitely is similar to the show. And and if you have an idea of like, "Hey, can we try this?" Unless they've tried it and they know from experience it doesn't work, they might say no. But if you have some new idea or new thought, they're open to it. They're like, "Sure, go and give it a shot and see what happens." So it's nice because it's structured, but you also have freedom to kind of do what you want to do also. So it's not like this regimented, you have to be this way. I do know that there are some researchers will say, like, you have to take out the light bulbs in your car so that when you open up your car door, it doesn't, that like dome light doesn't come on. So there are some like hardcore people out there that are, very strict in that way. And then there's some researchers in the BFRO that aren't quite as strict, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. So I take it you are 24/7 camping for what, 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, from like Thursday to Sunday. So like you get there Thursday. Thursdays are, you sit around the campfire, you tell stories, you meet each other. And then Friday you start doing the workshops and going on day hikes and kind of searching around. And then, Friday and Saturday night you like do night hikes and expeditions. One of their favorite activities to do is to have all the women do a night hike on Friday nights, because that tends to attract more Bigfoot creatures in their experience. And so, the women will go on a night hike and go singing as they're like hiking down the trail, and, and then they see if they get any activity.
That's pretty interesting. That's like that episode where they had the Girl Scouts all screaming around the fire and singing.
Right, exactly.
I remember that. Well, getting back to the initial question, or the part I asked earlier, was when you gave that presentation. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Would you be able to share some of your data from that presentation?
Sure. I
I know
was
there was
thinking.
quite a bit.
Yeah, a little bit. That's what happens when you're a professor. You tend to have too much data. Um, yeah, I can definitely share it. I was thinking about your question earlier, about the data that you were talking about, and I was looking at my PowerPoint to kind of refresh my memory. Are you talking about the qualitative and the quantitative data that I
Yes,
referred to in the presentation? Yeah,
certainly.
yeah. So, as a professor of education, I mean, I was trained as a social scientist to, kind of look at data objectively to see if there's a pattern. And before I was a professor, I worked with students with behavior disabilities for about 10 years. And when you're working with behaviors, you look for patterns. And when you see patterns, you can, I don't want to say make predictions, but you can make pretty strong predictions of like, oh, if they do this, this is what's going to happen next, right? And I read a lot of Bigfoot related books, um, and I like to kind of tease out the data that I'm seeing. I definitely like older books, meaning like the ones from John Green, that were back in the 60s, 70s time period, because I feel like those are um, more true to the actual experiences that people had. Like when you read about accounts from the 60s and 70s in books that are published in like the 21st century, you lose some of the data and the translation, if that makes sense. Because it's kind of been reinterpreted a little bit. But getting back to the data and the presentation that you're talking about, I talked about qualitative data, and qualitative data is the anecdotal evidence of the existence of Bigfoot, right? And so this is like the accounts. These are those town hall meetings that we hear about, or the stories that people tell, right? And these stories that we've heard of people's encounters have gone back 300 years at this point, right? Including Native American. Almost every Native American tribe on the North American continent has some type of hairy big brother bipedal creature that their tribe is aware of. Pioneers, mountain men, explorers all have these stories from the 1700s, 1800s, of these ape-like Bigfoot type creatures. And so we have all this qualitative data. And when you look at this qualitative data, there's common themes related to Bigfoot. And that's what you do with qualitative data is you take all these stories and you look for common themes. And the common themes are their size, their shape, their physical appearance, their vocalization, the smell, their behavior. These are all common themes that qualitative data looks at to say, hey, there's a pattern here. There's something here that exists that is real. And from a social scientist point of view, the qualitative data alone would prove the existence of these creatures. If this was a social science, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because you have 200 years worth of these common themes that keep coming up. Now, someone might ask the question of like, well, are people just repeating what they've heard in the past? Sure. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. But I mean, even if you just look at the data from 1850 or 1860 to 1970, all those common themes are still going to fall into those same categories of size, shape, physical appearance, vocalization, smell, behavior, right? Like it's all going to fall into those same common themes. So there's just from the qualitative data alone, I believe that there's something out there. And then the way science is we like numbers, right? Like we like to see numbers, and I think this is one of one of the great things about Meldrum's book, um, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, is he looks at the quantitative data, and looks at the range of the footprints, and is looking at the actual numbers, and looking at the existence of these creatures through quantitative data, through like actual measurements. He cites in his book, Dr. Fehrenbach, who analyzed over 700 Sasquatch footprints from a numbers point of view, and the range of the footprint size was anywhere from 4 to 27 inches, which is a huge range. The average size being about 16 inches. What was interesting was that when he looked at these footprint sizes, it created a bell curve. And in science, bell curves are created by something that is happening in nature or happening in the world. If all these footprint sizes were faked, you would have a scatter plot. You wouldn't have a bell curve. You would have all these scattered points all over the graph. So to me, again, it's just leading to that, proof existence that yes, there is something out there. There's something in the woods. There's something that is real that people are actually experiencing and seeing. And that's basically what the data that I talked about at the presentation.
I thought the bell curve that is most appropriate right now with what we're going through.
Definitely.
Yeah. I don't know much about Dr. Fehrenbach. I don't even know the name, actually. What period of time, or is he still kind of in the Bigfoot world?
No, I don't believe he's still in the Bigfoot world. He's retired. He was working with the Oregon, as in the state Oregon Primate Research Center. This was back in I think he did this back in the mid 90s, if I remember correctly.
So he was probably around with Grover Krantz and maybe the beginning of Dr. Meldrum.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, that's neat. It's it's like a point of reference. You kind of have to put him in that timeline. Like, where did he appear?
Right.
Who's phasing in? Who's phasing out?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and again, from your data and from your presentation, just in your opinion, do you believe that Bigfoot is flesh and blood, or do you believe it's something else? And when I say something else, some say spiritual, like where you use the word the woo, but others even go as far as to say alien or from another dimension or a planet.
That's a difficult question to answer. I will, first off, I don't believe that they're alien. I don't believe that they're from another planet. I hope I don't isolate anybody by saying that, but that's just my own personal belief, that I don't believe that they're, an alien or a workhorse from another planet that's been dropped off onto our planet. I do lean towards the aspect of the Native Americans' beliefs that Bigfoot or Sasquatch is a physical flesh and blood creature that can take spirit form, that can slip in and out of the spirit world. Now, everyone's definition of the spirit world is different. Does that mean slipping through portals and dimensions? If that's what your definition of spirit world is, then sure. If your definition of spirit world is the Native Americans' definition of, when you pass, you go into the great sky to join your ancestors, then sure, that's, then that's the spirit world. There's, and I'm not trying to like cop out on an answer. I just think I think Native Americans are more in tune with nature and the natural world and the spirit world than our current society is. And so for our current society, it's hard to understand or accept that notion of something being able to slip in and out of the spirit world.
Right.
Yeah, right. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm not trying to nail you down to an answer, but just your opinion, because we've all heard the stories of following a set of footprints that seem to stop and go nowhere. Some
Sure.
people say, oh, they just backtracked. Some people say they jumped into a tree. Some people say they jumped into a portal. It's 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 not that wild anymore to assume that Bigfoot could be more than flesh and blood, but what would it be? That's the question. And again, you can't answer that, but you do have some data, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean I, I mean, I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, like I want to believe 120%, right? Like I want to be able to see a print in the woods and be like, that is 100% a Sasquatch. But then at the same time, I have to think like, okay, well, we've had bears coming through our neighborhood that could just be a bear print that they, double stepped on, right? I would love to think like, yeah, they jumped into a tree and that's why the tracks ended. I mean, I've found, tracks where they've ended. I've found one print in the middle of like, why is there just one print? Right? Like, why isn't there two prints? Why isn't there prints leading up to this print? So I mean, it definitely is. It's definitely curious. And it's we're never going to really know until we find one. And and then at the same time, it's like, well, are we able to find one? Right? It's just, it's a hard question. It's a good question to talk about around a campfire.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some would say that there are government personnel that have found them and they just kind of hush it up. But, no one knows that for certain. I mean, I think it's kind of laughable to think that there's a squad of black cars that just appear when someone sees a Bigfoot and they shut you up and tell you to mind your own business. I don't think that's really possible.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard similar stories of that of and I kind of touch about it in my book that we'll talk about later, but how like if you have hardcore evidence, then somebody comes and visits you and says, yeah, you don't really have that. You should really keep your mouth shut about that. Where at the same time, unfortunately, in the Bigfoot community, we tend to like to eat our own, and I wish that there was more um, positive support in the Bigfoot community for the evidence that we find, and as opposed to well, that's not really what you found, or that's not really evidence, or that's not really true, as opposed to tearing each other down. Like I would like there to be more positive uh, buildup of the evidence that each of us finds. But at the same time, if there is a government group that's like monitoring us, I'm sure more than half the time they kind of sit back and think like, oh, well, they'll just tear themselves apart. So we don't really need to do anything about that. But if you come across something that's like hardcore, then, there's stories of people that like come and visit you and say, yeah, that's not really what you found. You need to keep your mouth shut. I mean, it's hard to believe that our government would spend time doing that. But then at the same time, we're talking about Bigfoot here, so I don't know.
Well, it's sometimes we just get half the story or part of the story. And again, pointing to your presentation, you mentioned the Ape Canyon encounter, and one of the key witnesses was Fred Beck, and we're going back to 1924.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you mentioned that he had what you might call an awakening in his later years that Bigfoot may have been paranormal. Like, could you explain that?
Sure. So, he had his encounter in 24, reported it to a ranger, got reported it to the newspapers, and you can do the research, or and find the actual newspaper uh, um, uh, written accounts of the Ape Canyon attack, if you want to call it that. But like later in life, in his in the 60s, Fred Beck wrote a book with his son, and he talks to his son about how he believed the whole encounter was um, perpetrated by supernatural beings, and they were in Ape Canyon to begin with because they had a gold mine, and the gold mine that they were prospecting, Fred Beck says that he found with the help of a spirit guide, actually two spirit guides. One was a Native American Indian, and another one was a woman. And him and his friends actually named the gold mine after one of the spirit creatures that helped them find that gold mine. So, and they found that gold mine back in like 1922, 2 years before the incident actually happened. So, Fred Beck always kind of had this supernatural spiritual connection to the spirit world to begin with, and maybe when the counter first came out, he was afraid to actually talk about that. He was afraid to say that he thought that the creatures were supernatural, because people would have poked fun at him, and that theme really hasn't gone away in 100 years,
And see, yeah, that's what I mean. You've got a classic encounter that if you know anything about Bigfoot, you know about Ape Canyon, but you never hear this side of the story. And this isn't coming from you. This is coming from the book that he and his son wrote.
Well, right. It came from the book that he wrote with his son, and then Lauren Coleman reported it in his book that he wrote in 2003. So it just leads to, is there a spiritual connection? Are they able to slip in and out of a spirit dimension? This isn't new. Like, this isn't something new that's just come out in the last 10 or 15 years. Like, these are thoughts that have been around for 100 years at this
Yeah,
point. Like,
that's
and you know, we're talking about a Bigfoot account that happened 100 years ago that could possibly have a spiritual connection, right? So we're not talking like 10, 15, 20 years ago. We're talking 100 years. That's pretty impressive to kind of think about.
that's amazing. I never would have thought that myself. I mean, again, it takes a little digging, and obviously there's a trail from Ape Canyon to Fred Beck to him and his son to writing the book and putting that out there, which most people don't look at. So,
Sure.
but switching gears to flesh and blood, do you think that Bigfoot has a family structure if in fact they are flesh and blood? Which obviously, even with this spiritual aspect, um, you know, I would assume they are flesh and blood most of the time, if not
Sure.
all of the time. But we'll continue to question that. But do you think they have a family structure?
I do. I think they're probably flesh and blood more often than not, and that would make sense with the evidence of juvenile sightings. Because I mean, obviously they have to, breed in some capacity, and so I'm gonna go on the limb that they're probably flesh and blood more times than not. But yeah, I mean, I do think that they probably have a family structure. I mean, there's very few animals or creatures in the world that are completely isolated or loners or exist outside of some type of structural group. I mean, even when you look at, a lion, a male lion might be this, dominant creature, but he still has female lions or a pride that he, watches over, protects. Same with the silverback gorilla. I mean, they're still part of like a tribe or a group. So yeah, I mean, I do think there is some type of family structure. Um, or some type of group structure in that capacity. I always, when I hear these encounters of, and this is going to sound silly, but it's the only thing I can kind of equate it to. But, when I hear people talk about, encounters of like, oh, I saw one standing in front of me, and then I heard something off to my left or off to my right, or there was a whistle to my left and there was a whistle to my right. So I don't, so there must have been more than one. I always think of the original Jurassic Park uh, movie where the guy's hunting the velociraptor and he sees the one velociraptor in front of him and he's like, oh, I got him in my sights. And then the second one like pops out to the side.
Yeah.
So like it's like, like that's what I think of. It's like, okay, so we'll send one out to be seen, to be like distracted, while the other two or the other three or whatever might, sneak off or, remain hidden or, whatever the capacity is. But yeah, I mean, I do think that they, have some type of structure where they're together. I don't think that, I think 9 out of 10 times there's probably a second or a third one there. Very rarely, I think there would only be one by itself.
Yeah. I guess I've heard stories of people saying that there are sentries.
Yeah, guards.
right.
Yeah.
Posting lookouts, making sure their area is safe and protected.
Sure, which it makes sense because we as humans do that, and other creatures do. Birds do that. They have a lookout, a squirrel. They're always kind of looking out and making sure that things are safe and okay, and they're the first ones to tell you that like, oh, there's an intruder, there's somebody here that's not supposed to be there. So yeah, it would make sense that they would have some type of sentry or guard kind of on a lookout to make sure that they're stay safe.
Right, which would again push the point that there is a family structure to protect.
Yeah. Yep. Or a community structure of some sort.
Right.
Yeah.
I take hikes and walks like anybody else does, and I see stuff out there in the woods, and I don't always know what it is. I've found prints, I've found tree structures, but do you believe that there's a connection between Bigfoot and stick structures and tree structures?
I do. I actually think that the stick structures are a form of communication between them. I don't think that they're necessarily a form of communication from them to us, because why would they want to communicate with us? If they wanted to communicate with us, they wouldn't be so elusive to begin with. So I don't really think that the tree structures are a form of communication to us. And a perfect example would be like the X stick structure. I hear a lot of researchers or people say that the X stick structure is, warning us to stay away. I have a hard time with that because in Native American culture and language, 2 arrows made into a cross means friendship. So, kind of taking that into perspective, what if these X stick structures that we find are actually a form of communication to another group of Sasquatch creatures that are saying, hey, this is a friendly area to come to. This is a friendly area to be at, as opposed to telling us to stay away, because they don't need to tell us to stay away because they can stay away from us. They've proven that over and over again for hundreds of years. So yeah, I do think it's a form of communication that they use among themselves that we just happen to fall upon.
That's a really good point.
So,
now you did kind of mention the BFRO expedition, but have you personally had an encounter?
I believe that I have. I believe. Outside of the footprints that I've found, I do have a time where I was yelled at. I believe that I was yelled at by one of them, and when I was in the Pisgah National Forest, I believed that I saw a conical shaped head move across the trail behind me. And then I, at a later point, I believe it charged up behind me. You know, and then shortly after that, on my hike back, I found a print in the same area. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the closest closest encounter that I've had was the one in North Carolina.
Okay. Wow. And again, I mean, you get a sight? It wasn't a sighting, but it was pretty much like you said, the prints, the noise, and
So it's yeah. So I was actually um, I was actually at a 5-day silent retreat because I study mindfulness meditation as well, and so I was actually at a 5-day silent retreat, and I was there. There was a mountaintop that I would go up to and meditate for a period of time, and then I would go back to the campsite, but and there was a trail that went up to this spot that I would go to, and there was this one part of the trail that was always muddy, and I always brought a camera with me, and take pictures of the forest and nature and stuff like that. And so anyway, so my last day, I go up there. I didn't have a camera. I just went up because I only had a few minutes, and I sat there and I was meditating. And while I was meditating, I had this thought or this feeling to turn around. And so I stopped what I was doing and I turned around, and the trail behind me, I see this conical shaped head go across the trail. And I was like, huh, that was interesting. And so then I turned back around and I continued meditating, and a couple, I don't know, 5-10 minutes passed, and I promise you it sounded like elephants ran up behind me and then crashed into the woods. And at that point, I said, I should probably go. and and I got up and I said thank you, and I walked back down the trail, and I was walking down the trail, and that little mud spot, that clear as day, was a print. And I literally started laughing because I was like, you knew I didn't have a camera. I was like, you knew I didn't have a camera. That's why you left this here. And I left and I went home after that because I was going home that day, and I went home after that, and I didn't go back and take a picture of the print because I felt like it was a gift. I felt like they were giving me a gift, and of being like, yeah, we were here. That on that same trip, I had found a couple of stick structures. I'd found some like rocks that had been stacked, and and like, and I'm not saying like on the side of the trail, like I'm talking like in the woods, where like most people don't go. And so yeah, so it was definitely a very cool experience that I hold close to my heart because it was very real.
yeah, that sounds like they figured you out.
Yeah, a little bit.
This guy's just gonna sit in one position while he's staring
Yeah,
off into nothingness, and we're gonna walk right by him, and he's not even gonna see us.
yeah, pretty much.
I can combine two questions into one. The reason I've learned how to do multiple questions, I think I've watched enough of the coronavirus press conferences. I'm learning
Sure,
how to combine questions. You
sure,
ever watch
sure.
those? Oh my God, they're so boring.
Yeah, no, I try to stay away from them.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Um, so um, obviously everybody, I have recently started hearing more about juvenile Bigfoots, but um, I've got a lot of encounter stories that people send to me, and they ask the same question. They don't just tell me an encounter; they even ask me questions. I can't necessarily answer them. Although I did have my own sighting, but I can't answer their question, and I kind of like to just put it out there for people to try to answer for me. So the question is how can something so big stay elusive for so long, and what are they? Meaning, do you think they tend to be more human than ape, more ape than human? And do you think that the possibilities of something so big staying elusive for so long is just unfathomable? Like, is that really something that I mean, people do occasionally see them, but how do they stay out of our eyesight, out of our, are we just that much of a bunch of wusses that we don't go out into their territories enough to go find them? I mean, obviously the North America is massive, and there's still places that people don't go. I mean, there's still airplanes that go missing in our wilderness and are never found. People that die and are never discovered
Right.
or never
Right.
never found.
Right.
So how is it possible?
That's a great question.
I know. I thought about it for a long time.
I had so many answers that were like popping into my head that not really answers. I should rephrase that, but examples and thoughts as you were asking that question of, basically how are they able to stay so elusive? And I mean, I do think that there is a human element to them. I think that there is some type of
Did we lose you? You seem to have blipped out. Are you there?
I'll give you I'll give
Hey,
you a
Ernest,
couple of
we lost you for about 45 seconds. So
no.
yeah, you
As
just came
far
back.
okay. Uh did you hear the part about the consciousness?
No.
Okay. So I was talking about how like I think that they have some aspect of consciousness to them. Like not I'm not saying that they're necessarily human like we are, but they have some type of consciousness equivalent to our humanness, right? So they're able to like problem solve and kind of think through situations, right? And so, when you're asking the question about how they can remain elusive, I was, kind of thinking of some examples and thoughts and ideas, and I'm not saying that these are answers, but these are just kind of some of the thoughts that popped into my head. For one example, my wife and I, when we go for hikes in the woods, we like to go on game trails, right? So we like to go on like the deer game trails. So we're not going on like the regular footpaths. And where we live, our neighborhood has like 180 acres of woodland surrounding our house. So we oftentimes go on these game trails just to kind of like wander around and, look at things that you normally wouldn't see. And we have some neighbors that like to go jogging, and so they jog on the main trail. And I can't tell you how many times we've heard them coming that we've just squatted down, took a step back, stayed on the game trail, whatever, and just watched them go on by. They had no clue that we were there. And we're very loud, especially when we're in the woods, because it's not our nature, it's not our element. So I'm pretty sure it's easy to hear us coming from a good mile away and be like, here comes those clumsy humans again, let me just have a seat here and wait them out as they pass by. And we would never even know it. We wouldn't even know that they were sitting there watching us as we were going by. Same with deer. If you're walking in the woods and then you get this sense of like, wait, I'm being watched, and if you stop and you look long enough, you'll find a deer sitting there completely frozen, just staring at you, waiting to see what you're going to do, if you're going to walk on by or if you're going to go after them. So I mean, I think that's part of the reason why they're elusive. And then another piece of it is, there's research about us having plant blindness as humans. Like we as humans don't value plants, right? Like we don't see them as the same level as us. Even though if we didn't have plants, we'd all be dead. But
Right.
like, so we have this like plant blindness, and our vision has this 0.5 second delay of what we see. So we don't really see in real time. There's a slight delay in what we see. So, we're walking down the trail, and we walk past a bunch of trees, underbrush, whatever it may be. And as we walk past, something in our mind says, hey, what was that? Or that seems weird, or that seems odd. And then we stop and turn around and look, and we're like, oh, it's just a tree, or it's just a bush. And then we think nothing of it and we walk on. What if Bigfoot, Sasquatch is standing there next to the tree, we're already distracted as humans as anyway. Most of the time when we hike, we're looking at our feet, not straight ahead, right? So we walk past something and then we're like, oh, what was that? We turn around and look. By the time we turn around and look, a good 2 or 3 seconds has passed. That gives that creature more than enough time to step back into the brush and disappear. And again, they're vanishing or they're elusive or so I actually don't think it's that hard for them to remain elusive from us because we're so disconnected from nature. We're so disconnected from the present moment of what's happening right now because we're not tuning into our five senses. We're not tuning into what's around us. So I think it's actually very easy for them to remain elusive and to hide from us.
I couldn't agree more. And I think I've talked about it ad nauseum, but I'll just make a comment that when I had my sighting, the first thing I did was find a footprint. The second thing that happened, I heard talking and there was no one around me.
Mm,
The third thing that happened to me was it started making, and all I can call it is our primate sounds. And then the fourth thing that happened to me was I actually saw it, and that happened over a span of like, I don't know, 36 hours.
right,
So all
right,
those things, kind of happened sequentially, but
right.
over a long period of time. And obviously, sure, I know about Bigfoot. I've been doing this for a couple of years, with the encounter stories and sharing. But God, I mean, I was completely ignorant. Like even when I heard it, I was like, that's not what I think it is. Like, but I felt it. I could feel it. It happened.
Right, right.
But I was completely ignorant. I saw the print. I'm looking at the print. I took a picture of the print. I measured the print. But at the same time, I first thing I thought is, oh, somebody's pranking me. This can't be real. I completely ignored my senses, I think. And
Well, I would kindly disagree with you on that. I don't think you were ignoring your senses. I mean, I think you definitely were using your senses to pick up on what you were experiencing. I just think that you were having a healthy dose of skepticism of, is this really what I'm seeing? Am I, because like, we spend so much time researching this and thinking about it that we want to believe, we want it, we want Bigfoot to step out of the woods and shake our hand and say, "You're doing good work. Keep at it." Right. But at the same time, when we find something, we're like, "Wait a second, somebody pranking me?" like, is this really what I think it is? And I think that's healthy. I think that's how researchers should be, is to, first think of like, could this be a bear print, or could there be people in the woods, that I haven't seen that are talking right now, or, is that a mountain lion grunting as opposed to a Bigfoot? So it's, I think that you were spot on with what you were experiencing, and I think it's good that you had that little bit of a doubt. That's just my thought.
right, self-doubt. Yeah. One
Mm.
other thing that happened that was really weird was I didn't remember it at the time. Um, I I am fairly large. I wear a 2X, and I took off my hoodie at night and I stretched it across the front door of the cabin because there was no shade. Like I felt like something was watching me.
Right.
I
Yeah.
was so creeped out that I
Yeah.
stretched it across the window to the front door. Like I had this overwhelming feeling that something was staring at me, but I don't know if that was true or not, but it sure did. It sure did kind of bug me out.
Oh yeah, we were in a cabin in Tennessee on the edge of the Smoky Mountains, um and the window over the kitchen sink like looked out, into this like thick forest, and it was probably a good like 8 feet off the ground. And the whole time we were there, like my wife and I, like, and we didn't talk about it at the time. It was like after we left, I was like, I couldn't look out that window because every time I was by that window, something was looking at me. And she was like, "Oh my God, yes!" Or it's like we couldn't see something looking at us, but it was just that sense of like something was there watching us, and it was. So yeah, I've had that feeling before. It's definitely a creepy feeling to have.
And you both felt it.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. We both felt it. So yeah, she's my guide. So like when I find something, I'm like, Christine, is this what I think it is? And she'll be like, Nah, I think it's this. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, all right. But then But then at the same time, if she finds something and she was like, I think this is a print, I'm like, hell yeah, it is. So,
It's good you can share the hobby together.
yeah, it's definitely a fun hobby we have.
This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great to share this. I don't get to always have these types of conversations with people, so it's been fun. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you
Yeah,
for the
and
offer.
speaking of fun, I mean, I really enjoyed your book. Now, it has been a little over 2 years that I've read it, but can you kind of share a little bit about Spirit of Sasquatch and where we can find it?
Sure. So Spirit of Sasquatch is you can find it on any of the major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. It's in ebook format and print format as well. And I have copies, so if someone wants an autograph copy, they can always contact me and we can work out an arrangement for that. But Spirit of Sasquatch actually, when we came back from the 2013 expedition in New Mexico, I had a dream that my oldest son was skipping stones with a Bigfoot creature. And I thought, wow, that'd be a really cool story. And so I started off as a short story, and then 6 months later it ended up being a full-length novel. And so I kind of wrote it in a way where if you have no experience with the Bigfoot research world, you could read it and learn something. If you're an experienced Bigfoot researcher, you could read it and be like, oh, I've heard about that, or I've seen that, or I've experienced that, or I've heard that before. So I didn't want to target it just to one specific group. And since it is it is a fictional tale, and it is about a young boy that gets rescued by a Bigfoot creature, and he lives with them for a few years, and during that time his family and the government are looking for him, and then it all kind of comes together at the end. So there is some government conspiracy in there because that makes for a good story. And I do talk about the spiritual aspect of Bigfoot. So I do kind of dive into the woo of the Bigfoot world a little bit in that, but I also keep to the flesh and blood parts of it. An example of part of the woo, I had this difficulty of how do I have Brock, the main protagonist, and the Sasquatch creature kind of communicate with each other. And so, I did, I had him do more like thought images. So it wasn't like words. It wasn't that like the Bigfoot creature was putting words into the boy's head. It was more of these thought images. And, and I used it sparingly because I didn't want to dive into it too deep because I didn't want that to take away from the story that I was trying to tell. But I think it's a fun story. I think I've heard it's a quick read, but it was fun to write. I enjoyed it. Some of the encounters are either experiences that I've had or my wife's had or friends of mine have had. So I think all books are autobiographical in some sense. We just like to wrap other characters around the truth. So.
Yeah, it was a good book, and I know I actually it's a pretty good sized paperback book. I got it from you at the autograph signing at the local brewery.
Yep. Strange Ways Brewing. Yeah.
Strange Ways, that's it. I think they
Yeah.
moved.
Did they?
Yeah, they moved to a more modern looking building.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But, yeah, that was I do sometimes have a hard time. I mean, as old as I am, I should probably not be as fixated on Bigfoot as I am, but I do gravitate towards a good Bigfoot book. If it's got Bigfoot, it's got to be good, and if the story's really compelling, that's all I need, and I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've been working on. It's not a sequel, but I mean it's definitely in the same world, but it kind of dives into Brock's older brother Darius, and then one of the other characters in the Spirit of Sasquatch book. So I mean I am working on a sequel to that. I'm hoping to get that out sometime in the next year or so.
Oh, that's great. Well, do me a favor and give if you want to do autographed books, I can put it in the show notes. But if you want to mention how to contact you to get an autographed book, feel free.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Just search my name, Ernest Solar, ErnestSolar, or I'm also on Facebook. You can look up my author page, author Ernest Solar, and send me a Facebook message, and we'll figure out how to get an autographed copy out to people if they're interested.
That sounds great. And like I said, I'll put it in the show notes, and we'll take it from there. Ernest, thank
Awesome.
you so much. I really appreciate your time, and this will be something a little different. I have various guests come on and talk, and just to reflect for 1 second on something you said about being plant blind. Um, this one guy mentioned to me, his name's Anthony. He was on a couple episodes ago, and he mentioned that he was in his truck, saw nothing out of the ordinary until he saw a deer in front of him because of the color of the hair of the deer. And right next to that deer was something black, and one was a deer, one was a Bigfoot with the coloring of a deer, and then there was another Bigfoot that was
Wow.
black. They were
Wow.
next to each other, and they both stood up and then ran away. And he, absolutely did not see him until he saw movement,
Sure.
saw the hair color, dismissed it as a deer, and
Right.
like you said, dismissed the surroundings,
Right.
kept, and all of a sudden it sat upright and was not a deer.
Yeah, I think part of their elusiveness is that we actually really don't know what they look like. So our brains kind of, figuring out like what is that? So it kind of goes through you know, this array of thoughts, images, and pictures trying to categorize what it is, and then eventually it kind of like melds into our brain of like, holy crap, that's what it is. you know?
Yeah,
So
can you imagine what they think of us when they see us driving around in some big truck or on a bicycle or walking a dog with a party of people and
yeah.
shouting and screaming and yelling and acting as goofy as we do?
And we wonder why they're elusive.
Right. And now we've got COVID-19 on top of that.
I know, right? Yeah, actually, there's been so many talks about, or so many reports about how nature is re-emerging itself because people are, staying inside and not out and about as much, and I'm curious how that's gonna play out with Bigfoot sightings in the next, few months. I've
Well,
been kind of
yeah,
curious about that.
the Appalachian Trail is shut down, so you have to go to your local parks. That's about it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It
Crazy
is.
times.
Well, take
Mike,
it.
it has been wonderful talking with you. Thank you for this opportunity. And
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. And if anybody wants to contact Ernest about his book, I will have it in the show notes.
American soldiers used the jargon rock apes during the 1960s and 70s Vietnam conflict, which described an unknown creature about a meter to a meter and a half tall. Resembling a hair-covered ape with the exception it was larger than an ape, less hairy, tailless, and to their great surprise, they walked upright and did so in an unexpected, normal human way. In an alternate military unit, a former GI wrote using the term Pal's ape, which referred to Pal, who was the platoon leader, after one of the creatures wandered into a restricted zone during the middle of the night. All hell broke loose when the dark figure continued to advance into the far end of the restricted zone, and it was fired upon. When daylight came, we realized we'd blown the living shit out of a large ape. It was a male with the face of a wild man, and not much else left of it to describe of the stinking thing. We poured fuel over the remains and set it afire. Another GI offered this description. An oblong head framed the hair-covered face. Dark, deep-set eyes lay beneath a prominent brow, and they did nothing to complement the heavy jowls and angry mouth. as it stepped into a small clearing. It could be seen with matted, reddish-brown hair down the creature's neck and covered most of its body. Whatever it was, it stood at least 5 feet tall, had broad shoulders, long, thick, muscular arms, and a heavy torso. It walked upright. In the small clearing, it stopped and studied the Americans. "What the hell is that?" someone called out from behind. "It's a rock ape," said another member of the squad. Another team member disagreed. "No, it ain't," he said. "I've seen rock apes, and that sure as hell isn't a rock ape. It's an orangutan. Well, isn't it?" It was asked while the others had kept their eyes glued on the strange creature. "Well, if it is, then he can't read a map. There are no orangutans in Vietnam." And even though it wasn't an orangutan, orangutans in the wild don't walk upright as a normal course of behavior, and rarely are they terrestrial. At night, the orangs nest in trees. They wouldn't be walking upright about a clearing at night. Why? 'Cause there's too many tigers prowling about. The only populations of orangs are found in Sumatra and Borneo. But as an aside, there are small tailless monkeys known as the Barbary macaques found in Morocco and Algeria. Those have at times been called rock apes. Also, the apes of Gibraltar are also known as rock apes. It is important to note that these Barbary macaque adults are much too small to fit the description soldiers gave. Plus, they are quadrupeds. They nest at night, and they wouldn't be walking through a military base at night either. If not an identifiable primate, then what was it that these soldiers saw? Imagine this scenario, and tell me if you're brave enough to even do this. On a narrow country road leading to a hollow, you meet a convoy of pickup trucks loaded with hunters in their gear. The convoy stops, and the driver of the lead truck is securing something in the truck bed. You carefully pull alongside and ask if they had any luck. He is very cordial, said they had taken some good buck. And then you ask if anyone in the group has heard or seen any unusual critters while hunting. He looks surprised, maybe even hesitates. But then he tells you that the driver of the last pickup truck had heard something whistling at him one morning. He suggests you talk to him. I say I would try to do that, and I wave, I get back in my truck, and the convoy starts again. But I did intend to wave to the last driver to stop him, but then I saw another vehicle stopped at the creek at the bottom of a hill waiting for the road to clear. You decide not to stop the truck, but you figure you could find him out from the local residents who were driving the last truck in the convoy, and you'd contact him later. It's not easily done, but after leaving a few requests for the information at a country store, the owner calls the writer and gives the man's name and telephone number, and they discuss his experience as follows. This is a 60-year-old man who's been hunting for 30 years. He's very familiar with all typical native animals that inhabit the area. The witness was camped with a group of men who had private property in that hollow. On the morning of the incident, he walked to his tree-mounted deer stand before daylight and was settled in at daybreak. He studied and stated that he had watched numerous squirrels, birds, and 5 or 6 deer from daylight until about 8 a.m. He stated that until about the hour the woods around him were noisy, and with the sounds of birds and the movements of animals in the leaves. But after about 8 a.m., he heard a loud, coarse whistle coming from the side of the ridge west of him. The sound puzzled him because it did not sound like a whistle a human would make, and he knew there should have been no human in that area. He watched and listened intently for several minutes before he became aware that the woods around him had become still and silent. That observation made him very alert and somewhat anxious. After another several minutes had elapsed, he heard the whistling sound again, and the sound was closer and a little to the northwest of his stand. At intervals of 15 minutes or so, the sounds were repeated, and it became apparent that whatever was making the sounds was crossing the hollow in front of him at a distance of about 200 yards or more from his stand. By that time, he noted he had seen or heard nor any animal since that first whistle. He became totally absorbed by the whistling sounds and in trying to determine what was making them. After the source of the sounds crossed the hollow to his northeast, the source turned toward him, whistling occasionally as it approached. By about 9:30, the whistling sounds were within 100 yards of him, and at that point they ceased. The witness stared intently in that direction but saw nothing of the mysterious entity making the whistling sounds. By about 10 o'clock, the witness was ready to leave the area and did so. He later told the other members of the hunting camp about his experiences, but they were just as perplexed about the sounds as he had been and were unable to explain them. None of the other deer camp members had ever heard such sounds, and none offered any plausible explanation for them. There is little other explanation for the sounds, and the witness cannot verify that this was made by a primate. But could you just imagine the fact that there are no animals that make a whistling sound that a hunter could not determine?